If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
Hello, I'm Kevin Moore and welcome to the show. My guests now are Muad'Dib and Nicholas Kollerstrom. Muad'Dib is the producer of the homemade film 7/7 Ripple Effect, which was released via the internet. In the film, he disputes the official account of the July 7th bombings. I'm also joined by Nicholas Kollerstrom. Nicholas conducted research into the 7/7 bombings, challenging the official narrative. His book, Terror on the Tube, Behind the Veil of 7/7, opens up the debate over who perpetrated the 7/7 bombings. Muad'Dib and Nicholas Kollerstrom, welcome to the show. Well, Muad'Dib and Nicholas, welcome to the show. So I'm going to start with you, Nicholas. Just tell us very briefly a bit about yourself.
Well, Kevin, I was, prior to the London bombings, I was at UCL, University of London.
Yeah.
I was a postdoctoral research fellow in history of science for about 11 years. And it was quite a comfy position. And, but I was also in the British 9/11 Truth movement. And it was quite a dynamic group. When 7/7 happened, we naturally started focusing on that, and a whole lot of these very clued up people were talking about what had really happened, and that's how I got into the 7/7 story. Also, it was right on my doorstep, Tavistock Square, just next to my college, and I'd been around those stations all my life, so I naturally got drawn into the story, and somewhat to my surprise, well, I think it was discovering the train time story about 7/7. I then became part of the story.
And that's what started you off, the train times.
I think that was what pulled me into it in a big way. People said, well, wow, you really found out something here.
And with the train times then, what was it you found out?
Well, we found out that all the trains from Luton to King's Cross that morning were severely delayed. Massive delays, and specifically the 7:40 train was cancelled. And that was the one the government was saying the four lads had taken that morning. And a year later, the minister had to admit that in the House of Commons, and that was, as it were, the point at which the big crack appeared in the official story.
Okay.
It's what Muad'Dib Ripple Effect called.
Yeah. So, Muad'Dib, just tell us a bit about yourself to begin with as well, please.
Well, I excuse me. I got into this really, like Nicholas, through 9/11, because on the morning of 9/11, when I watched the TV footage of the second plane hitting the South Tower, it was obvious that when I saw the towers come down, it was obvious that it was controlled demolition using explosives, and that the planes didn't bring them down, because the second plane that we did see that morning only hit the corner of the South Tower, and all of the jet fuel burned off in a big orange fireball outside the building. So the North Tower, which we didn't see the plane hit that for a few days until the Norday brothers, who were filming with the New York Fire Brigade, showed their footage of the first plane hitting the North Tower. And that hit the North Tower square on, so the fuel from that plane could have gone inside the building and could have, if it was possible for jet fuel to melt steel, which it isn't, at least there is some credibility to the story that the jet fuel had an effect on the building.
But for 7/7, in your opinion?
Oh, 7/7, because I'd studied 9/11, it was obviously an inside job, and they were brought down by controlled demolition, the buildings, including Building 7, which wasn't hit by anything. I was then very suspicious on the day of 7/7. A friend of mine phoned me from, because I was living in Ireland, and a friend of mine phoned me from London and asked me if I knew what was happening in London, and I said, no, what's happening? So he said, oh, there's been some explosions, and it's all over the news, and you need to turn on the television and have a look. And so I did that and was flipping channels, trying to get all of the different angles from all of the different reporters to get an overall picture of what was happening. And I was very suspicious that because of what was happening in the world at that time, looking at the bigger picture, I was very suspicious of it because the British public had been demonstrating on the streets that they didn't want the British troops fighting in the Middle East. And the government would need to do something to change the public's mind.
Yeah.
So you think it was a false flag operation
Yes.
to increase public support for the war on terror at that time?
Yes.
Well, what was going on at the time of the London bombings? Let's just quickly look at that.
Yes, just to add
yeah.
something there, that the whole G8 summit there was under enormous pressure to forgive the debt of Africa. All the wonderful music concerts there'd been on the days leading up, and all the Olympic Games euphoria, that whole G8 summit would have had to take real substantial steps to forgiving African debt, which the big multinationals really didn't want at all. And so what happened? Bush and Blair meet together at that summit, and the day after 7/7 happens, and the whole summit is derailed. It's back to the old war on terror rhetoric, which those two both know how to do. And on the very same day of 7/7, the afternoon, Tony Blair informs the British people that this was an Islamic crime. So the police get their directives right on the day from their boss about who has done it.
Right. So let's just go back to the train times to begin with. So in your opinion, the train times are wrong, and well, they were wrong. You proved them to be wrong, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, we went up to Luton. We got interviewed all the commuters, and we got the raw data, commuter files from the station at King's Cross and Luton, and we published the actual time of trains, and that would not square with what the Metropolitan Police had released. CCTV pictures at Luton and pictures at King's Cross. The times were just not compatible with any actual train, and they tried therefore to shift the train time. They said, oh well, perhaps they got an earlier train, perhaps they got the 7:25, well, in that case, how come all the media were singing from the same hymn sheet for about a year, saying they got the 7:40, and they've tried putting out CCTV years later with very doubtful looking timestamps on them, but we, the public, don't really believe this.
If you just tell us now about the pictures, because I think that's another, wouldn't you say, Nick, another important subject to come to. The pictures that have come out as being tampered with, the footage of the 4 bombers with the backpacks on, which we'll put on the screen now just to show our audience.
Okay. Well, we were given, in the early stages, we were given just one photograph, dated and time-stamped, of the alleged 4 bombers, supposedly, outside Luton train station at I think it was 7:22, 50, something, almost 7:23. Yeah. Okay, and a lot of people, including myself, have looked in detail at this photograph and analysed it. And there's lots and lots of people on the internet and on YouTube who've made videos analysing that picture, and everybody agrees that it has been fabricated, that it's been done in a computer Photoshop or something like that. It's done so badly that it's obvious. If you really look at it, it's done so badly, it's absolutely obvious that it's fabricated, and very badly fabricated.
Yeah.
So why hasn't this come out at the inquest then?
Well, the inquest weren't interested in any alternative narrative. There was just, this is what you've got to believe. And also, I think Lady Justice Hallett might have said, we're concerned with looking at how people died, allegedly. So something like photographs, they wouldn't feel obliged to go into in any detail. Now, as it turned out, the inquest hadn't got any post-mortems on any of the 52. This is one of the staggering things that emerged. No post-mortems. So somebody didn't want the British public to see how those 52 were really killed.
And these bombers, well, alleged suicide bombers, they had bought return tickets, haven't they, for the trains, haven't we? I mean, do you find that a bit suspect that they had plans to go back, or did they? Was that just a decoy?
No, I don't believe so. No, I believe that they were taking part in the training exercise, and that they obviously thought they were going to be going home, so they bought return tickets. I mean, that's what everybody would do. So
you believe that it was part of a training operation?
Yes.
Okay, but no idea who, maybe what that would have been for? I mean, what department? I mean, are we talking about working for a sort of a government agency as such?
There may have been multiple people involved in it. Peter Power, obviously, his company were involved in running a training exercise. In your opinion, this is, yeah? Well, he admitted that on the television. that day, that he was running a training exercise, a mock terror drill, with the same agenda as what actually happened. So we know that he's admitted it. Whether there were other people who, alongside him or with him,
Right.
in parallel with him, were doing other training drills, we're not sure of. What we would like is an independent public inquiry.
And another thing I want to touch on as well is the bombs in the backpacks. What kind of explosives were they, Nick?
Well, the story kept changing. They couldn't keep the story straight. Start with, it was military-grade explosives, which real experts probably did find around the blasted tube coaches. Then it turned into this thing called TATP, which is quite difficult to make, and it was alleged there was a bomb factory in Leeds where they'd brewed it up, and there were loads of it in the bath left behind. And then a couple of years ago, that morphed into black pepper and hydrogen peroxide, which really won't hardly go bang, or it certainly won't blow up underground coaches. And remember, these lads had no discernible interest in chemistry at all.
But they must have known if there were bombs in there what was in the backpacks, surely.
I would imagine there was nothing much in those backpacks. Hasib Hussain was seen rummaging around in his backpack at King's Cross around 9 o'clock in the morning, after the others had left him. He was alone. He was perhaps wondering what exactly was there. They were just would have been given those backpacks and not expect anything much to happen with them.
Okay. But if there were explosives in there, then and the sort of explosives, Nick, that you've just talked about, then you'd have to be very careful, wouldn't you, walking around with that?
Yeah, because TAPT is highly volatile. You can't shake it about, you can't run with it or anything. It's highly volatile. It will go off. But if we continue with the idea that they were taking part in, as we believe, in the mock terror drill, they would have been given what they would consider would be mock bombs.
Right,
in the backpack. So that wouldn't cause them any alarm until they got to London Thames Link too late to catch the tube trains they were supposed to catch as part of the exercise, and found out that the tubes had blown up and there were people killed and injured. And then, of course, they would probably want to look in the backpacks to see what was in them.
After the break, we'll get more into the carriages, because I think there's a lot to speak about that as well. So stay tuned as we'll continue to talk about the 7/7 London bombings with Muad'Dib and Nicholas Kollerstrom. See you after the break.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.
Welcome back. I'm still joined by Muad'Dib and Nicholas Kollerstrom. We're discussing the truths behind the London 7/7 bombings. So, Muad'Dib, I just wanted to say before the break there as well, you mentioned about the bombs used, the homemade bombs that were in the backpacks, or apparently in the backpacks.
Yeah.
But there was something you wanted to say about that.
Yes, the first reports that we got about the explosives were that they were high-grade military explosives, which would not have been available to these alleged bombers. And that information was put out by a chap, I believe his name is Francois Chabot, who was part of the, or if not head, of the French anti-terrorist police. And he came over to London to help with the investigation and in whatever way he could be of assistance.
Yeah.
And it was him that put out that it was military-grade high explosives.
Okay.
And then later on, as Nicholas has touched on, we were told that, no, it wasn't military grade. Well, in fact, I don't think they actually denied that it was military grade. They just gave out the story that it was TAPT, which had been brewed up in a bath in Leeds.
Which, again, you refute, don't you, that that was probably set up, would you say?
Yes, I would say so, because they showed us photographs of the bath and this liquid in the bath. But as I understand it, if it had been TAPT, it would have evaporated and it would not have been there as a liquid in the bath.
Okay, well that's a good point. And Nick, as well, with the bombs, on the trains, you refute that they were in backpacks. I mean, what you say in your book is that the backpacks couldn't have been on the floor because the metal would have been, you know, pushed under, where a lot of the pictures that came through of that day, the metal's, you know, it's all facing up, isn't it?
Yeah, there were several accounts.
Tell us about that.
Of the metal being toned up as if something underneath had exploded. And the inquest we've had for 5 months now, the 7/7 inquest, gave detailed accounts of exactly where people were, and that showed, especially for the Edgware Road coach, 3 huge holes in the floor of the main, it's the second coach on the underground, and all 3 of those big holes had people fall into them, okay? And one of them, the person died stuck in the hole. The other 2 they managed to get out. Now that is utterly and completely incompatible with a suicide bomber having a rucksack. And by the way, where they put the bomber there, that's Mohammed Sadiq Khan. They tried to imagine him sitting on one of the seats.
And he was on which train, by the way?
This is the Edgware Road train.
Yeah, the Edgware Road. Okay.
It wasn't near any of those 3 big holes because they only had one witness who tried to imagine he'd seen Khan there. So the witness position, the alleged position of this terrorist doesn't fit at all with where the holes are, and I think we're left with no option but to say that that whatever blew up must have been underneath that coach. This takes us right back to the original testimony, very reliable, of Mark Honningsbaum of the Edgware Road coach, which he was outside the Edgware Road station that very morning, sent it to the Guardian, and he described how that coach got lifted off the rails by that blast. It was a terrific blast, and that is what came the first morning from the Guardian report. And we've got so many accounts which the officials keep ignoring, people getting their feet blown off or their legs blown to bits. Time and again, throughout the terror on the tube that people experienced that morning, it's their feet that get blown off. And it must have been something right on the floor that somehow blew up, something terrible happened.
Okay,
and I believe that's
then,
why.
If the bombs were underneath the trains, as what you're both saying, yeah, what happened to these apparently alleged suicide bombers?
Well, let's just say, first of all, I think that's why they got rid of the coaches. No journalists and no members of the public were allowed to see those coaches, as far as we know. And after a year, they were just disposed of. That's the primary scene of the crime, and they had to get rid of it. Why? Because whatever ripped apart coaches did not resemble a coach blown up by a single rucksack. So I think that is part of the problem. But sorry, just to come back to you.
Well, I'll ask you, Muad'Dib, right?
Yeah.
Where do you think the bombers went? Or what happened to them?
They obviously, because the 7:40 a.m. train was cancelled that day, they couldn't possibly have caught it. And they couldn't have caught the train that the government, a year afterwards, said that they caught an earlier train, which was the 7:25. Well, they couldn't possibly have caught that either, because they were shown outside Luton Station at 7:23, and it would take them much more than 2 minutes to get from outside the station with heavy backpacks, big backpacks, which are supposedly full of volatile explosives, for them to get from that outside to get onto the trains. It would have been impossible for them to do it. And so they would have caught the train after, the first one to leave after the 7:40 was cancelled, which I think was 7:58 or something it left. I can't remember now, it's such a long time since I made the film. But anyway, all of the trains were delayed by at least 25-30 minutes. So even the one that they caught afterwards was delayed. And they would have got to Thameslink and to King's Cross after the 3 tube trains had already blown up. And they would have realised then that they were taking part in a terror drill that had gone live, and that they'd been set up and they were going to be blamed, and that they were supposed to be dead because they were supposed to be on those tube trains that blew up with all the dead people. Okay? So they would have been in a mad panic. If you try to put yourself in their position, realising suddenly that they've been set up and that they should be dead because these trains have blown up.
And what was going to happen to their families, probably,
and to them, because they were supposed to be dead, and they're still walking around, they're still alive. So what I think happened is that they decided that their only option was to go to Canary Wharf and try to tell their story to the media. And of course Reuters is there, most of the big print media are based in Canary Wharf. And so they would have gone to Canary Wharf desperately looking to tell their story so that they wouldn't be killed, because they must have known that they were going to be killed.
Yeah.
And then there were reports from media all around the world, and including it was reported on the television, because I was in Ireland flipping channels, and it was reported on one of the TV stations that they had reports coming in of 3 suicide bombers having been shot, and I think the word was neutralised, in Canary Wharf. And so then you start to think, well, you know, if these guys have blown themselves up on 3 tube trains, how can they get shot dead in Canary Wharf? It's not possible. So that was another anomaly. And so I looked at the traffic, the chatter on the internet, as well as the media reports of this, and they were all talking about people having been shot and killed in Canary Wharf.
So is there still links on any websites where people can still find the connections with these sort of news blasts that you're talking
there
about?
are various investigations. I think massive confirmations in the years since Muad'Dib made his video. My website gives a whole lot of people wrote in and testified on my website that they had heard the news reports, and also people at Canary Wharf being given peculiar commands, very high level security clampdown. And could I just add that those lads at King's Cross, when they were suddenly terrified and bewildered, all they would have done was to bolt back to the very same platform they'd got off from, the Thameslink, and jump on that same train, the same line they just got off from, and then they just had to change at London Bridge, and they'd end up at Canary Wharf in a few stops. So it was a very easy journey to get a place to get to without a great deal of forward planning on their part.
And these alleged suicide bombers then, I mean, what's in their background, would you say? I mean, these were just normal people, weren't they, going about their business?
Yeah, they were young men looking forward to getting university business studies degrees. They cricket fanatics, and talking about their girlfriends or the latest trainers they were saving up to buy. And Tanweer was proud of the car he'd got. This is the sort of chatter and stuff. They weren't terribly religious, maybe Tanweer a bit, but on the whole those lads were not very religious. They were proud to be British, but no interest in politics. Nobody remembers them. They got a bit angry about the Iraq War, but nobody remembers them being interested in politics.
But what about the videos that were left behind, though?
Well, I think they're rather dubious. I mean, Khan made some sort of video, but his wife, in the way she talked about it, Hasina Patel, saw it just as a home video. She didn't see anything very terrible or damning about it. So I suspect it was slightly tampered with.
Tampered in what way?
Well, it made him seem like he was, we're talking about the end of 2004 now, when he was going off to Pakistan for an indefinite period, okay? And these videos then came out.
Yeah.
And it made him seem like some heartless terrorist who was leaving his family for good, his wife pregnant with a second child. He'd given a notice to his school where he was a learning mentor, greatly respected there.
Okay, so Muad'Dib, what was you going to say there, just quickly?
I think you were referring to the 2 videos, and Nicholas is referring to a different one. I think you were referring to the 2 videos that were put out where they were wearing headscarves, and there was Mohammed Siddiqui Khan and Shahzad Tanweer.
That's right, the suicide videos,
and Nicholas is referring to a different one where he's holding his baby.
Yes.
Right, so there's more than one video there, okay.
I've posited in the 7/7 Ripple Effect film that I made that they would have been asked to make these suicide videos as part of the training exercise that would maybe be made into a film and shown on the television. But their families have said, and people that knew them have said, that those videos were actually made when they were younger, and that the lip sync on the videos doesn't match with what they were reputed to be saying. And we know now with computers and sound technology and that they can actually make these things happen.
But why hasn't mainstream media picked up some of the anomalies that you guys have touched on so far?
Well, they just seem very paralysed. I mean, it is extraordinary the way the journalists don't seem to use thought at all on this matter. The Daily Mail occasionally brings out a report of what conspiracy theorists believe, and that's as far as it goes, due to, say, in Birmingham, Dr. Nassim at his mosque, he showed the ripple effect, and he found that everyone there believed the story, and that made a story that the Daily Mail could talk about, for example. But otherwise, it's as if it's too terrible for the British media to be able to face this possibility.
But there has been, well, there's been a public inquiry as such into the 7/7, which I guess you both think there should be.
Yeah, and so do the relatives of the deceased and people who were actually injured on the train, on the trains and the bus that day. Everybody, as far as we know, wants an independent public inquiry, including myself. But we've been denied it, and Tony Blair at the time said that he wasn't going to allow a public inquiry because, in his words, it would be a ludicrous diversion.
Okay.
And the media is controlled, and they're told what they can report and what they cannot report, and they obviously do not want the truth to come out.
And I mean, another sort of strange anomaly as well was the documentation that was found of the suicide bombers at the various locations, which wasn't even, there wasn't a lot of damage done to the documentation as far as I know, was there?
No, there wasn't. And Mohammed Siddiqui Khan's, they found documents, ID of Mohammed Siddiqui Khan at all 4 of the blast sites.
Yes, initially it was 3 of them, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, 2 and then 3, and now we find.
And then with the inquest, they added his mobile phone at Piccadilly line, so that was all 4 sites, which is a total absurdity.
Yeah, he couldn't possibly have been in more than one place at a time. He couldn't possibly have been in 4 places at once, could he?
No.
Yes, I think it was with Lindsay. They allegedly found it where they alleged his body was in one corner of a tube coach. They put his passport, his driving licence, his mobile phone bill. This is a quite absurd load of bits of his identity, as if he'd carry all that around with him. And it reminds you a bit, actually, of a 9/11 story, where they left a whole lot of clues in a car park.
Yeah, the Quran and things like that.
And a Quran,
Yeah.
So
there's also another, speaking about those videos, there's a lot of people that are of the opinion that Mohammed Siddiqui Khan and Shahzad Tanweer were actually MI5 assets, that they were actually working for MI5. And one of them is a guy called Charles Shoebridge, who is he's an expert on security matters. Then they bring him on the television in various programs to give his opinion, like they also bring on Peter Power.
Right.
And he said that at the time that either MI5 were very lax beyond belief, or these people were working for MI5.
Okay. Well, when we come back after the break, I want to touch on your 7/7 ripple effect, because obviously that's took a life of its own on. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back for those who've joined. I'm here with Muad'Dib and Nicholas Kollerstrom. Now, Muad'Dib, just before the break there, we were just talking about the public inquiry. And do you think so far with the inquest that's happened that the full facts have come out?
No, absolutely not. They were never intended to. The whole thing has been a sham. And they never looked into who actually carried out the bombings. The judge on the very first day took it as a given that it was Mohammed Siddiqui Khan, Shahzad Tanweer, Jermaine Lindsay and Hasib Hussain that carried them out, and then that was it. They never looked at that. And they've gone through the whole inquest, and there's been absolutely no post-mortems done. How can you have an inquest with no post-mortems? The whole thing is ridiculous.
Yes, it was quite macabre, really. It was a wallowing in horror. That's what I feel the inquest tried to do. Endless descriptions of people's anguish and,
what were some of the key
victims.
things, again, that we've covered already, but some other key things that they left out?
I left out. Well, I mean, they didn't include, for example, Peter Power's terror drill. That was totally
That wasn't
central.
included, no.
That was omitted. But other stuff came out which was enormously important, and I think there's a massive information. There are literally hundreds of witnesses testifying, okay? If I may give one example, Hasib was saying at King's Cross, he comes onto the CCTV video at 5 minutes to 9, and then they got loads of him up until about 20 past 9, and I think that clearly indicates that they had no video of him at King's Cross before 5 to 9. And for me, that really convinced me, not only that they really were at King's Cross that morning, but that they were late. They did not have any CCTV, Hasib Hussain, prior to that time when the CCTV began. That's one example where being at the inquest, I think, gives one a first-hand experience that I think we'll soon be in a position to be able to really tell the story, the fascinating story of this crime that went wrong and what happened to the London people in London.
Well, talking about telling the story, that's exactly what you yourself did. And tell us a bit about the 7/7 ripple effect.
Well, I made the film I'd already seen a couple of other films about it, and they pointed out some of the anomalies. And they were both good films, but they didn't put the story there. They didn't put the facts together to show a story to the public of what most likely did happen that day, so that the average person coming to it not knowing anything about it could actually see what the evidence pointed to having happened that day. And so I made it in that way to tell the story of fitting all of the facts together, and all the facts do fit with my film, and the facts don't fit with the government's official conspiracy theory, because that's all the government story is. It's a conspiracy theory, and they label us as conspiracy theorists when we use facts, and they're the ones using the theory.
Or you would go against the mainstream verdict.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So how long did it take to produce the ripple effect?
I'm not sure now, because it's quite a while ago since I made the film. It was released onto the internet specifically on the 5th of November of 2007. I wanted it to be up there.
I mean,
on
this has
that
been
day.
a sort of internet hit, hasn't it, as such? As well.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, all over the world. I've had people write to me, email me from all over the world, thanking me for having made it, including from various places in the UK.
And did you send it to any sort of mainstream channels as well, or just
I sent
internet?
it to Yorkshire Television, which is based in Leeds, and 3 of the young men, the alleged bombers, were from Leeds. So I sent a copy of it to Yorkshire Television, hoping that they would show it in Yorkshire to get some support for an independent public inquiry to actually find out who really did do it, because it's obvious these 4 young men did not do it.
Yes, say that.
I mean, again, Nick, you would agree with the content in the ripple effect, yeah?
Largely, yeah. And I think we're still waiting to hear of a public presentation of the ripple effect, where a group of British Muslims, people sit around and discuss it. That's what I like to hear. Or sixth formers who watch it and then discuss it. That's what we want to hear now. We want to hear the people of England giving their impression and response to the
But of course, the documentary is just based on your opinion. You know, it's all based on what you think happened that day, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's using facts from the mainstream media. That it's all factual. I haven't made anything up. It's all factual. And the only sense that it makes, putting all those facts together, is the story that I've told in the film.
You came into a lot of problems not too long ago, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that.
Well, what happened was, because my film was so popular around the world, and everybody with an open mind, or almost everybody with an open mind who watches my film, will know that that's what happened. And of course the government is very frightened of that, and I think that that's what motivated them to arrest 3 friends of the 4 original alleged bombers and put them on trial, charged with doing hostile reconnaissance. In other words, having gone to London and searching out sites for the other 4.
So part of the initial conspiracy into the first 7, the only 7/7 attack.
Yeah. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to convict these 3 young men, and they were desperate to do that. They wanted to convict these 3 young men so that they could say, see, these 3 are guilty of helping the other 4, so by extension the other 4 must have been guilty, and that my film is wrong. Okay, and I think that was the object of their exercise in doing that. But having made the film and putting all the evidence out there, that's very convincing. 6 months before they were put on trial in the public domain on the internet. In the trial of these three young men, the judge, it was at Kingston Crown Court, and the judge, Mr. Justice Gross, during jury selection, had told the prospective jurors, of course you know that Mohammed Siddiqui Khan, Shahzad Tanweer, Jermaine Lindsay and Hasib Hussain carried out these attacks.
Yeah.
Well, it's outrageous for him to do that, because in England we're supposed to have a presumption of innocence until people are proven guilty. And there is no credible evidence that would prove that the four alleged bombers actually did it. In fact, my film proves that they couldn't have done it. And so consequently, the three young men couldn't possibly have been guilty of helping four other young men to do something that those four other young men didn't do.
Anyway, they got off, didn't they? The jury acquitted them.
Yeah, yes, they were found unanimously not guilty because there was no evidence against them because they hadn't done it.
But in that meantime, you had sent a DVD in.
Yeah, what
to
happened
the
was that after the judge had misdirected the prospective jurors before he'd even selected them, then on the first day of their trial, the prosecutor, Neil Flewitt QC, told the jury that there was no doubt that Mohammed Siddiqui Khan, Shahzad Tanweer, Jermaine Lindsay and Hasib Hussain had carried out these attacks. Well, no doubt, millions of people doubt that they carried out these attacks. My film, to most people's satisfaction, proves that they couldn't possibly have done it. So for him to say that to the jury is committing perjury. He's lying to the jury, saying there is no doubt, when there's lots and lots of doubt. So with the judge having misdirected them whilst he was selecting them, and then the prosecutor lying to the jury on the first day, it was obvious that they were trying to stitch these three young men up. Okay?
Okay.
And so I sent copies of my film to the court. I didn't stalk anybody, I didn't try and bribe or threaten anybody. I sent copies of the film to the court as an amicus curiae brief, which is perfectly lawful. Okay? It's actually got a legal term in Latin, amicus curiae, which means a friend of the court brief. And that's where anyone who's not actually a party to a trial can send, and they think they have relevant information, important information about the case, can send, as an amicus curiae, can send the information to the court, which is what I did. The court is then in a position with this evidence that it can examine the evidence, and it can decide itself whether it will admit that evidence into the trial and inform the jury of it, or whether it's not credible or it's not relevant, and then they can dismiss it.
Okay,
and
so
that's what normally would happen.
What happened then when the DVD went in?
Well, what happened was that I was trying to prevent the government from perverting the course of justice by lying to the jury and keeping the truth out of the court, away from the jury. I was trying to prevent a miscarriage of justice.
So what did they do in turn to you?
Well, they accused me of doing what they were doing. They accused me of attempting to pervert the course of justice when I was doing the absolute opposite. I was trying to prevent them from doing it and trying to prevent a miscarriage of justice. Those three young men who couldn't possibly have been guilty could have spent 20 or 30 years in prison if they'd have been convicted for something that they couldn't possibly have done. And I couldn't sit still and allow that to happen.
Right.
So that's why I sent the DVDs, the films,
so
to the court.
What happened then to yourself?
Well, they charged me with attempting to pervert the course of justice. They got an arrest warrant from Westminster Magistrates Court, and then on the strength of that warrant, they went to the European Court and got a European arrest warrant for me. And I was arrested in Ireland and eventually extradited to the UK to stand trial.
Okay, what's the key then to the time frame that you was extradited and you was remaining in prison? What key events were happening at the time outside?
At the time they served the original arrest warrant, they were about to start a second trial of these three young men. They were so desperate to convict these three young men that at the first trial, the jury couldn't reach a verdict. So instead of letting them go, okay, they decided to put them on trial again. And I was arrested just before their second trial was due to begin, because they didn't want any of the truth to get into the court. Okay, so I had to be taken out of the picture. So I was arrested, and
how many
in
days
Ireland.
did that turn into from?
Well, from the time I spent in prison, various times during the proceedings in Ireland, plus the time that I spent in Wandsworth, I spent 157 days in prison.
Now, Nick, you went to see Muad'Dib, didn't you, when he was in
Yes,
prison?
visited a few times in
And
Wandsworth, yes.
what was his state?
Well, I was quite surprised at his sense of sort of good cheer, and I just had pleasant chats with him on various subjects. And he asked for sort of news about the inquest, what was going on, and it was quite an experience to see him in jail, and I felt that our stories were to a large extent in accord. You know,
What did it do for the 7/7 calls, do you think?
I think it was vitally important that the government should be seen to take these totally bogus steps that are in no way warranted. And it's got itself into a bit of an embarrassing situation, especially with what was totally unexpected, that the jury at the recent trial let him off, declared he wasn't guilty. And we found a total media blackout on this. And so my website was getting jury hits because I put up an account of this trial, dramatic trial, in which he was released.
Okay.
And the media just weren't reporting this.
So just back to you, Muad'Dib. Okay, what was the state of your mind, just very briefly? I mean, did you think at the time when you was in prison that this was all worth it? I mean, that you was doing the right thing?
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah. I realised, knowing how evil these people are, I realised when I sent the DVDs that there was at least a 50-50 chance that they would do what they did to me. But I had to do it.
And in your opinion, as well, what's it done for your cause?
Well, it's got me on your programme, and it's got me on lots of radio shows and things like that. So it's actually publicised the film and what I've gone through. So it's actually, it's backfired on them. They've shot themselves in both feet because they've given me a platform to be able to tell the truth about what really happened. And when I was in Wandsworth, to just go back to that, in the prison there, they had to keep me in prison. This was their logic. They kept me in prison whilst the inquest, the sham inquest, was going on, so that I couldn't turn up at the inquest and offer the truth to the inquest, and to meet, you know, family members, people who were there, and tell them what really happened and give them copies of the film. So they had to keep me in Wandsworth. Eventually I got bail about 3 days, released from prison, 3 days after the inquest finished. And during the inquest I applied for bail on a number of occasions, and they couldn't find me to take me to court when they were supposed to. On 4 occasions they couldn't find me in the prison to take me to court. The very first time my legal team turned up, and the judge wanted to know where I was. And they said, oh, he's out on bail. And this was the prosecution, said he's out on bail. And of course then the judge, if you don't turn up when you're out on bail, then they have to arrest you and put you back in prison. But my defence said, no, that's not true, Your Honour. He's in Wandsworth prison. He's not on bail at all. And the judge wanted to know why I wasn't there. And this was in the morning, and he said that he could get me brought to the court for the afternoon for me to apply for bail. And so they contacted the prison. The prison said they couldn't find me. Okay, but the very next morning, at 8 o'clock, my cell door opened, and they could find me to take me for what they said was a random drugs test. Okay, so they couldn't find me to take me to court for me to get bail, but they could find me the very next morning, first thing, for a random drugs test. And then there were 3 more occasions when they were supposed to take me to court to apply for bail, and all the time the inquest is going on. And they didn't take me to court when they were supposed to, and eventually the judge got annoyed on the last time, and he said, I want Mr. Hill here in the morning without fail. Okay, and he granted me bail, but the inquest was finished.
Yeah,
That
so
was
and that's
yeah.
your key reason to why you believe
Yeah.
that release happened at that point.
And I want everybody to watch the film, and I want them to help us to force the government to let us hold an independent public inquiry into what really did happen that day. But it has to be truly independent.
Well, Muad'Dib and Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
For more information on today's guest, visit my website, themoreshow.co.uk. Don't go anywhere, as I'll see you after the break.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.